our president, our president Paddy Mackey, who died peacefully at home last Thursday. He was aged 93. There was a private family cremation today, and we understand there will be a celebration of his life to be arranged in the future. He and Julie have had a long association with the Northern Irish Gardens Heritage Trust, along with their daughter Tracy, who is a member of our committee, and have attended annual conferences over many years. And we were honored to have Paddy as our president from March 2019. He was, of course, best known as an ornithologist and was the founder of the Castle Aylesbury Conservation Centre in 1982, now the WWT Castle Aylesbury Wetlands Centre. And he received an MBE in 2004 for his outstanding services to conservation in Northern Ireland. His interest in horticulture was fulfilled by the transformation of a barren point on Mahi Island into a remarkable woodland garden, noted for its shrubs. And in 2021, he was awarded the A.J. Whaley Medal in recognition of his contribution to the cultivation of rhododendrons. And I must also mention here that another recipient of this medal, John Gould, sadly died last February, in late February, and both individuals certainly left a long, active, and very fruitful lives, and will be greatly missed by all who knew them. The committee of the Northern Irish Gardens Heritage Trust, and I'm sure we speak also for all our viewers this evening, would like to extend our heartfelt sympathies to Paddy's wife Julie, to Kerry, Tara, Tracy, and grandchildren. We will post a detailed obituary for Paddy onto our website in due course. Mark is also a much valued member of our committee and well known both here in Britain and abroad, and his contribution to trees and the urban environment. He holds a PhD in urban forestry from the University of Ulster and has devoted around 50 years of his life to what is called the green space industry, that is, developing, preserving, utilizing public spaces for greening, like parks, gardens, and woodlands. He's worked as a tree officer for local government and as a consultant in private practice, and during his career developed quite a number of major urban greening initiatives across Britain and Ireland. He is very much involved in the development of the National Programme for Community Forests initiative, which saw the planting of woodlands on the fringes of many British cities, and was the main author for the important and very impressive 650-page UK government report in 1993, Trees in Towns, a new survey of urban trees in England and their condition and management, which assessed the quality and quantity of trees in urban areas of England. At the time, he was a lecturer at Glasgow College, Britain's National Centre of Arboricultural Education, and he was there for 19 years. And during his time there, and since his retirement, he has published a very large number of academic papers, magazine articles, and quite a few books, especially over the past 10 years, including Trees in Towns and Cities in 2015, Street Trees in Britain in 2017, and his monumental study, The Tree Experts, A History of Professional Arboriculturists in Britain in 2021, all with Windgather Press. And more recently, at the end of last year, he published his autobiography, Planting Ideas in the Urban Forest, Autobiography of a Tree Expert. And by the way, you can download that book for free on the internet, and you can find it on his site. He has his own site. Mark has his own site, very nice site too. Not surprisingly, he has been the recipient of many awards over the years, notably an MVE in 2007, and the following year was the first person in Britain and Ireland to receive the International Society of Arboricultural's Award of Merit, the highest honour they can bestow. So it's therefore a great pleasure to introduce Mark this evening. So Mark, it's all yours.
Many thanks for that, Terence. Much appreciated. Just to say, I also echo what you have said about Paddy Mackey. It's very sad, his passing, most especially for his family, but also for all of us who knew and admired Paddy over the years. So I can only echo what you've already said on that. I want to thank my colleagues at the Northern Ireland Heritage Gardens Trust for inviting me to give this Lecture of the Year. It's going to be a bit different to previous lectures in the fact that we're not focusing exclusively on heritage gardens, but we're talking a lot about trees and heritage landscapes. And I know that many of you in this webinar tonight care about trees and care about the urban landscape. So I'm hoping that it will be of interest to you. I just get rid of that. I want to begin my story in West Wales. After a rather misspent youth, I ended up on the Portobello Road in London, being part of what many people politely called the counterculture. And like many people of my generation, we wanted, something more substantial in our lives. And many of us moved west to find more rural locations where we could, live more fulfilling and sustained lives. And I ended up in West Wales, which was convenient for me because my parents were living there at the time, and it was a springboard for me. I tried to get a job, but unfortunately, I didn't speak Welsh. It was a Welsh-speaking area. It was an agricultural area, and I had no experience of agriculture. And funny enough, the only people who would give me a job were the Forestry Commission. And I thought to myself, yes, I'll work with the Forestry Commission for a few weeks just to earn some money, and then I'll get a proper job. But I loved it. I really did. It was literally a breath of fresh air. I started off planting trees on Welsh mountainsides, which was a real change from, living mainly at night on the Portobello Road in London. And I soon started to love the work and got on really well with the guys I was working with. And then I wanted to advance myself, earn a little more money. And where the money was to be earned was in production timber. There were no places available with the Forestry Commission, so I actually set myself up as a self-employed felling contractor and hired out my services to local forestry contractors, mainly working on piecework, doing commercial felling. I also had heard about this thing called tree surgery from a couple of the trainee foresters that I was working with. And this sounded particularly interesting. And I managed to get hold of a book on tree pruning and tree surgery, one of the very early books. And I sort of set myself up doing, the odd tree surgery job. But I didn't really know what I was doing. Everything was going quite swimmingly until I had an accident, a chainsaw accident. One day I was doing quite simple line thinnings, but I'd kind of broken most of the rules in the book. It came on to rain, and instead of stopping work, I decided that I'd fell a few more trees, get to the end of the line. It was on a 1-in-3 slope. It was really, quite dodgy. And the rain came on harder, and I was still determined to finish the line. And then suddenly my leg slipped, and the chainsaw was cutting my leg. Well, just to cut the long story short, I was laid up in a plaster for some time. I was very lucky, actually, that the way the chainsaw went into my leg, I didn't actually lose the leg. But after a while, I signed on as unemployed because, I didn't have a job with my leg in plaster. And I went down to the local job centre in Llandilo in Carmarthenshire, and I had an interview with one of the job advisors, and they said, "Mark, what would you really like to do if you had the chance?" And I said, "Well, what I'd really like to do is tree surgery, but I don't have any qualifications, and I've dabbled in it a bit, and I don't know anywhere that actually offers tree surgery courses, but maybe you can help." And he said, "Leave it with me, and I'll see what I can come up with." And I got a phone call 3 weeks later, and he said, can you come down to the job centre, Mark? I might have something for you. And he managed to come up with a college in Surrey, Merestwood Agricultural College, which was then the only college in the country offering courses in arboriculture and tree surgery. And they had a course which was called the 10-week tree surgery course for craftsmen, which gave you a qualification at the end as a competent tree surgeon. And you didn't need any qualifications to get on the course, but you had to have had 1 year's practical experience. Well, I'd been a self-employed contractor for a year, although I wasn't doing tree surgery work much of that time, but that wasn't questioned. And so I got on the course. And to be honest, it changed my life. I ended up down in Surrey studying arboriculture. I went up a very rapid learning curve. And at that time, Merestwood was the only college in the country offering courses in arboriculture and tree surgery. And that's largely down to the gentleman on the right there, the great Peter Bridgman, who basically founded arboricultural education in Britain. And he was the head of department, and huge respect for Peter for setting up courses in the first place, and the course that I did. And he had a great team of people around him. Most of them, including or many of them, including Peter himself and John Whitehead, another great guy, were former Kew people who trained at Kew or worked at Kew. And I really learned a huge amount. At the end of that course, we got some assistance in finding a job, because anybody who wanted an arborist, a tree surgeon, knew to go to Merestwood, and this was the place that was turning out people available for work. And I got a post with Crawley Borough Council as a tree surgeon, and I began work with them, and this was really exciting work. Crawley, as you may know, is a new town, and it was interesting because the picture on the left shows me having felled a very large oak tree in the middle of a new housing estate. What the local authority had tried to do was retain many of its sort of heritage trees from the former rural landscape and incorporate them into the new housing estates, and even the cities, even the town centre as well. It wasn't sadly that successful, and many of those trees had to subsequently come down. They didn't thrive at all. So that was a very interesting experience. And on the left, on the right there is me up a tree dismantling a Lombardy poplar. But yes, I had a very enjoyable year working as a tree surgeon for Crawley Borough Council. But then I went back to college for another year. The course that I'd previously done qualified me for a 1-year course. And so I returned to Merestwood. But sadly, I actually ran out of money halfway through the course and had to get a job. I subsequently went back and sat the main exams externally and passed them, so I got the qualifications. But a friend of mine said that he knew someone who was setting up a tree surgery company. They had got an agricultural services company, and they wanted to get into tree surgery and that sort of thing. And this was at the height of the Dutch elm disease, and much of the work that was available was felling large dead elms. So I joined up with this guy, James Talbot Baker, a very interesting character who had actually worked as a broker in the city, came from a very, very well-to-do family, and had actually been in the territorial SAS. So he knew hard work and was very good mechanically. So we teamed up and formed a tree surgery company together. And I did all the climbing work, and he did the groundwork, but we were a great combination. And we specialized in taking down very, dangerous, dead and dangerous trees, mainly elms and such like. And we got quite a reputation for this. And thankfully, through James' family connections, we had quite a few illustrious clients. In my recently published autobiography, you'll get the full details of that. But we ended up doing what was a contract of a lifetime, and this was taking down the large, huge, dead, dying elm trees in the Queen's private gardens, Frogmore Gardens at Windsor Castle. Now, in terms of tree surgery contracts, it really doesn't get any better than this. And, the potential for damage in that situation, particularly, one of the trees was partially overhanging Queen Victoria's mausoleum. But we worked away there for, I think, nearly a month, taking down these enormous elm trees. And it was, a wonderful experience, an amazing contract. But at that time, I was thinking that, did I really want to be doing this kind of work indefinitely? Because it's very, very difficult and dangerous work. And, you've only a limited, time span at the top of your game. And I was thinking more of becoming maybe a tree officer in local government, because it was the urban realm that really interested me. I'd heard about this thing called urban forestry. I'd heard it first in 76 when I was a student at Merris Wood. But when I became a tree officer in 77, it started to really attract my attention. The whole idea of urban forestry really began with a guy called Professor Eric Jorgensen at the University of Toronto in Canada in 1965. He coined the term urban forestry in the modern context and started to develop the concept of the total management of what we call the urban forest. And the urban forest is all the trees and woodlands in and around an urban area that we collectively refer to as the urban forest. Well, of course, they had been managing trees in towns and cities ever since we'd had towns and cities. But it was really much on an ad hoc, unplanned, fragmented basis. And what Eric Jorgensen came up with was the total kind of management concept for the whole of the urban forest. This that you're looking at now is, you may recognize it, it's actually Letchworth Garden City, which is one of the much better designed urban forests, designed from scratch, but wouldn't be typical of the urban forest in many towns and cities. So it was a while before the concept of urban forestry really took off. It's interesting that this particular conference proceedings on the left here in 1971, a really good collection of papers, doesn't actually refer to the term urban forestry. It still talks about environmental forestry. On the right-hand side is probably one of the earliest mentions of urban forestry. And this was a series of papers that was put together as part of a proceedings by John Andreessen, Professor John Andreessen, who had succeeded Eric as the Professor of Urban Forestry at the University of Toronto. And I actually contacted both Eric and John Andreessen in 78 and started corresponding mainly with John Andreessen to begin with, and he sent me lots of papers and really got me interested. What particularly interested me about urban forestry was that it was the social science dimension of it. I realized that when I became a tree officer, I had learned a lot in college about trees, how to plant, manage, maintain trees, but I hadn't learned the people side. Nobody taught me the people aspects of it. And I was reading about this in urban forestry literature. And to me, what urban forestry was urban tree management with a social conscience. It was about making people's lives better. We'd known that, urban trees and woodlands have a number of benefits, what we now term ecosystem services. And in some ways, that kind of started with a guy called, I've forgotten his name now, but anyway, back in 72, a book was published, People, Plants and Environmental Quality. And this kind of set the scene on the different things that trees and woodlands can provide in terms of environmental, social, and economic benefits. And that's still the case today. And this is a little diagram here that was just produced by the United Nations in 2022. And it does show all the different, social, economic, and environmental benefits. They're stressing here climate resilience, which is a particular interest at the moment and will be for a while. So in my years as a tree officer in London, I started with the London Borough Harrow, and there I was responsible just for publicly owned trees. That's the council's own trees. But I wanted to, expand my knowledge and experience. So I actually applied and got the post of arboricultural officer for the London Borough of Wandsworth. Now, I went then from a suburban London borough to an inner city London borough. And Wandsworth at the time was one of the biggest tree sections in Britain. I had several officers and nearly 30 manual staff under my direction. And I moved up the learning curve very quickly. The account that's given in my autobiography will give you all the details, but it talk about being more about people than about trees. That was an understatement. And I learned a huge amount in a very short space of time. Meanwhile, urban forestry was catching on worldwide and becoming an international movement. The first textbook on the topic was published in 1978 by Jean Grey and Fred Danieke in America. And also in America, they had the first National Urban Forestry Conference in 78 in Washington, D.C. They subsequently had many more, but the first was in 78. Very nice. So just recap and say a little bit more on the concept of urban forestry. What do we actually mean? Well, it's characterized by what we would describe as a planned, systematic and integrated approach to urban tree management. What had gone on before was largely unplanned, unsystematic and fragmented. So these are the three components really of the urban forestry approach. And I have to take credit for that as something that I actually came up with and is now widely accepted. I actually came up with it during my doctorate degree and has subsequently been much implemented, including in the United Nations document on it. So what do we mean by planned, systematic and integrated? Well, first of all, planned. What we need is a long-term strategy with targets, actual targets that we need to achieve. Many of these strategies cover a 5-year period typically, but can be more. How do we actually do the work? Well, it should be on a systematic basis. Much of tree pruning is actually often done on a cycle, particularly pruning of street trees, maybe on a 3, 4, 5-year cycle. And we need to know, that trees, when they're planted, we need systematic post-planting maintenance in order to ensure that they're established. This work became much easier with the introduction of computerized management into urban forestry, urban tree management. The introduction of computers made a huge difference. When I first started in Harrow, London Borough Harrow, they had a card index, a paper card index. And when we were at Wandsworth, we introduced one of the first computerized tree management systems. Who's involved? Well, that's really every sort of stakeholder, community groups, voluntary organizations, businesses, and what have you. And the other thing to mention about that is urban forestry itself. When Eric Jurgensen sort of first came up with it, he sort of regarded it as a branch of forestry. But really, urban forestry is a multidisciplinary approach. It involves arboriculturists, foresters, landscape architects, urban planners, conservationists, ecologists. A lot of different disciplines have a role to play in urban forest management. And in that way, we need an integrated approach in the way that we manage the urban forest. I was getting increasingly interested in maybe becoming a lecturer in arboriculture at urban forestry. I'd been much inspired by the lecturers at Marist Wood College. And so when I should point out that I actually resigned as tree officer for the London Borough of Wandsworth. I have to thank Margaret Thatcher for that. She, as you may know, was very keen on privatisation, and the local authority at Wandsworth was a conservative local authority, wanted to do everything before Margaret Thatcher did it nationally, and they privatised my entire manual staff, people who were working on the trees for maybe 30 years were given the option of mowing grass or joining the dog queue. And I thought this was most unfair, and I actually resigned. And I decided then that I would maybe go into lecturing. But before I did that, I got a job at Kew Gardens as a tree pruner. I went back to working manually. A wonderful experience, just waiting then for a suitable lecturing post to come up. I had no idea how long that would take. And in point of fact, it came up fairly quickly. So I was only at Kew for 4 months. But I have to say it had a huge impact on me, particularly in terms of my love of heritage trees and heritage landscapes. And that really was a huge education. There's my favorite tree at Kew. I had the privilege of working on this tree. This is the chestnut-leafed oak, Quercus cataniifolia. It's actually the biggest tree in the gardens. And Kevin Martin, who is now the head of the Arboretum, this is also his favorite tree. It's a magnificent specimen. If ever you go to Kew, don't forget to see it. But not only was the landscape and trees at Kew an inspiration to me, I discovered a bookshop on Kew Green, Lloyd's of Kew Books. And I got to know Dan Lloyd, who introduced me to many of the great authors of works on trees and landscapes, such as John Evelyn, William Robinson, John Claudius Loudon, and many others. And this fired my imagination about the historic aspects of trees and landscape, and was actually the start of my own wonderful library of books. So eventually, as I say, a job came up teaching at Askham College, and it was partly horticulture, partly arboriculture. And I shared that with a former colleague of mine from Marist Wood days. And we shared the arboricultural lecturing, and we also shared teaching on nursery practices. Well, I had a great year at Askham Bryan, and then I was headhunted by Writtle College in Essex. They were looking for a lecturer in arboriculture, exclusively just teaching arboriculture, not anything else. And it was to horticulture, amenity horticulture students, and it was up to a higher national diploma level. And this was, higher education level, which I particularly wanted to teach. I'd had some teaching of that at Askham Bryan, but it was great to be the only person teaching arboriculture at Writtle College. And I would have happily stayed there. But then the ultimate job came up. It was head of arboriculture at Marist Wood College, the place where I trained myself, and that Peter Bridgman had founded. It was following in his footsteps. And I have to say, I applied for the job, and I got the job. So I went to Marist Wood College. Didn't quite work out as I'd hoped. I tried to develop higher education courses in arboriculture, but I actually had some resistance within leading figures in the industry who didn't see the need for any higher education courses in arboriculture. I remember one leading figure in the industry saying to me, "We don't need managers, Mark, we want monkeys." And he was serious, I shouldn't be turning out managers. The leading people in the industry had never got any qualifications themselves. They were self-taught. So they didn't really see the need for it. So I actually decided that maybe there was better things that I could be doing. Just to add at this point, I also got the opportunity to go and teach out in Hong Kong. This was my first connection. I could give you an entire lecture about my connections with Hong Kong and mainland China, which continue to this day. But I was teaching a postgraduate course. I did a block of teaching, intensive teaching out in Hong Kong. Many thanks to the invitation of the gentleman there in the back row, second from the left, Dr. Jung. And I have to thank him for many trips to Hong Kong to teach students and also trips into mainland China, exploring trees and landscapes with him. It's all in the book. Sadly, Dr. Jung passed away last December, and a great loss. A lovely man and left a huge legacy. His students sadly missed him. I started publishing on the topic of arboriculture and urban forestry, and I was encouraged to do that by Dr. Tom Hall, who was the editor of the Arboricultural Journal, and who was also the superintendent of Oxford University Parks. A great man, and I learned a lot from Tom, and he encouraged me to publish, and I published my first academic paper in 1983. And have subsequently published many, many more over the years. And he actually got the Arboricultural Journal subtitled as the International Journal of Urban Forestry. What I would say, though, is that my writing in academic papers on the topic of urban forestry, I didn't learn stuff out of a book. I actually learned it on the job. And I always show this picture to remind myself of, an example of how you learn from practical experience. I'm not saying anything against many of my colleagues in urban forestry who are prominent in the field, but quite a number of them have never actually done the day-to-day management of the urban forest on a practical basis. They've come from an academic kind of teaching background, but I actually learned about urban forestry by doing the job from 1997, 77 onwards. And when I got to Wandsworth, I really did learn enormously. When I first arrived, the planting scheme for that year had been established, but I had some money to plant on local authority housing estates. And I wanted to plant on some of the really run-down housing estates in the Battersea area. And this was my early attempts at what we now talk about tree equity, ensuring that everyone has an equitable access to the benefits of urban trees and the urban forest. And so I got my tree gang to plant 20-odd standard trees on about 3 of these run-down estates in Battersea, only to find out that a week later, most of those trees had been vandalized. And this really got me thinking about, how do we approach this kind of work? And basically, it gave me a whole new meaning to the term ground preparation. You didn't have to just think about planting trees in a practical way. You had to work with the residents and get them on side and do it that way. So that kind of got me really thinking. The people aspects of our work, and this is a quote from one of my earlier papers: "The aim of urban forestry is to improve the welfare of urban residents. The planting and care of trees is a means to that end, not an end in itself." I then started to do a lot of work in expanding the whole idea of community engagement. I won't bore you with the details because they're in many of my academic papers, but the 3 elements of what we call a community forestry program, where you're involving local residents and community groups, the 3 aspects of education, consultation and practical participation are all interrelated and dependent on each other. So this is now, established as the framework for community engagement in urban forestry. Also, in terms of working with diverse groups, some of the ethnic and minority communities, from my own experience of working in London, obviously need a slightly different approach. The basic principles still apply, but you need to take account of different cultures and what have you. And myself and a co-worker, Leah Shimada, published one of the earliest papers on this topic in 2004, Urban Forestry in a Multicultural Society, which still remains relevant today, I'm pleased to say. In the early 80s, I started to hear about an organization in Los Angeles called Tree People. It had been founded by a guy called Andy Lipkiss when he was only about 18 or 19, and got local people involved in planting trees in the Los Angeles area as a way of fighting the smog that was one of the main problems with the atmosphere around Los Angeles. And then he came up with this idea when they announced that the Olympic Games was going to be held in Los Angeles in 1984. He came up with this idea that Tree People, the organization he founded, would work with the local community and various other stakeholders to plant 1 million trees in time for the opening of the Los Angeles Olympic Games. This was the original Million Tree Project. And he was greatly aided in that by a lady he met who had worked in an advertising and marketing agency in London. She was actually an Australian lady called Katie Irving, and she ended up by marrying Andy. And together, Andy and Katie Lipkiss really drove this project, and it was hugely successful. It made national news in America, timing with the opening of the Los Angeles Olympic Games. And I was in contact with them, and at the end of the project, they came over to London and held a small kind of talk at the advertising and marketing agency where Katie used to work, organized by a guy called Don Bowen, who had been her boss at the agency. And they just talked to about 30 people there about the Los Angeles Million Tree Project. And at the end of the evening, I was talking with Andy, and he said to me, "You could do the same thing in London, Mark." And I said, "Well, that's all very well, but I'd need some real help on the marketing side." And he said to me, "Well, you're actually sitting next to a man who could really help you here, Don Bowen. How about it, Don?" And both Don and I laughed. But at the end of the evening, we agreed that we would meet up in a few weeks and actually discuss the idea properly. And that really was the birth of the Forest of London project, which was Britain's first citywide urban forestry project. It was initiated in 1984 and eventually launched in 87. It took a long time to build up the partnership. It was a partnership of all the London local authorities, major voluntary organisations, etc. And the aims were basically to get Londoners to work together to plant trees where they're most needed, increase their awareness and appreciation and sense of responsibility for trees, and to promote community involvement in planting and care of trees on publicly owned land. And it was a partnership, as I say, of local authorities, major voluntary organisations and private sector companies. And we actually linked up with an organisation called UK 2000, which was didn't actually deliver for us, but gave us our next big break, because I was offered the opportunity of using Richard Branson in some kind of promotional event to publicise the Forest of London project. And I came up with this idea, bearing in mind we just didn't want to get Richard planting a tree or something quite boring. I came up with the idea that him and I would climb to the top of the tallest tree in central London to publicise the project. Well, I had Richard's private number at the time, and I spoke to him, and he said, "Yes, cool, I'm definitely up for that, Mark. I loved climbing trees when I was a kid." And I pointed out, I said, "Richard, well, it's not really like that. It's more like mountaineering these days with ropes and harnesses, and I need to actually teach you how to use those." So I went round to his house over a weekend and taught him the basics of tree climbing. The event itself was a huge success. It generated national television coverage. It was on the 10 o'clock news. It was in several national newspapers. It was tremendous, but it was a pre-launch event to just publicize the project and to generate funding. And on the back of that, we got a huge amount of funding from commercial sponsorship and what have you. Having done that event, we then needed to think about the actual launch of the Forest of London project. And we couldn't just do a boring tree planting or anything like that, having done the Richard Branson tree climb. So I sat down and brainstormed this with Don Bowen, and Don said to me, Don was brilliant. I learned so much about advertising and marketing and promotion from Don. He said, "What's the essence of the Forest of London project, Mark? What's the message?" And I said, "Well, the message is this, Don. Many of London's trees are old and dying. And if we don't do something now, then the generation to come won't have a Forest of London that they can appreciate." So then I had the idea that why don't we start this by felling a large, old and dying tree? So that's precisely what we did. We consulted with local authority tree officers in central London, came up with a suitable tree in a London park, Clissold Park in the London Borough, Hackney. And so the event began with the felling of this enormous horse chestnut tree. But then when we identified it as a horse chestnut, I had the brains to put the second part of it together because we wanted to have a creative element to this as well. We then decided we would get school children in to come and collect the conkers off the tree because it was that time of year, and pot these up to be taken back to the schools and grown on. So it was a kind of death and rebirth kind of theme to the whole of the launch of the Forest of London project. And once again, it generated national television coverage and was in several national newspapers. And of all that coverage, this is the one that really made my day. The next day, this photo appeared in the Times newspaper with the caption, "Fallen chestnut gives seed to new forest." And I think it was just magical. It summed up the whole thing. And that was, to say, in the Times newspaper the next day. As fate would have it, 3 weeks after we'd launched the project, the hurricane, or sometimes called the Great Storm, in October '87, swept through the southeast of England and London and destroyed something like 15 million trees in a night. So suddenly, we no longer had to think about making Londoners more aware of trees. The whole focus of the project changed into coordinating the different local authorities and voluntary organizations to involve communities in planting trees after the damage had been cleared up. So that work continued, but interestingly, when we had announced the launch of the Forest of London a while back, the Horticulture Week, which was the main trade magazine, ran an editorial, and it was titled "Forest of London, a Model for Others." And this turned out to be very prophetic because in there they said, well, the model could be repeated, not just for London, but maybe we could have the Forest of Birmingham or the Forest of Newcastle. The whole idea was transferable to other cities, and that's exactly what did happen. And interestingly, the first city where we had a linked project was Dublin. I'd met up with a couple of people, Jan Alexander and Kieran McGinley, who were forming an organization called CRAN, which was about planting mainly native trees in Ireland, but they were very keen on doing an urban forestry project. And I'd also been helping them set up Crown and teaching on a forestry course in County Leitrim. And very kindly, Richard Branson provided me with free airfares, air flights backwards and forwards to develop the project. And the Crown people approached the Tree Council of Ireland and asked them if they would maybe set up an evening talk, a public lecture in Dublin, where I could maybe talk about the Forest of London project with the idea of getting a Dublin project organised. So yes, back in June, I think it was 87, in the ILAC Centre in Dublin, I gave a talk on the Forest of London project, and this kind of helped plant the idea for a Dublin project, and that's what turned out. It was called Crown Sycacha, Tree in the City, and it was launched in Dublin in 1987. And it was launched by the then Taoiseach, Charles Hockey, with something like 20,000 Irish pounds funding from allied Irish banks. The aim was to plant 10,000 trees across 10 districts of Dublin. The theme was based around thousands because it was in fact Dublin's millennium year, 1,000 years of Dublin, and various projects were being set up, this one included, to celebrate 1,000 years of Dublin. And the trees were to be planted by community groups and Crown volunteers, but it didn't actually go according to plan. And although there was some very good planting done, I love this one here. This is an early planting. I don't know if anyone remembers Joe Lynch from the soap opera Glenroe. A lot of good educational work, but the the steering committee never got set up. They never included the local authorities in any meaningful way. And so in many respects, it wasn't successful. But there then followed a number of other projects which were very successful. The Forest of Cardiff, Coedvig Caidith in Cardiff, that was excellent. And Forest of Oxford, Forest of Leeds, Treewise in Glasgow, that was another project that I set up. And then Forest of Burnley, which I didn't have a lot to do with, but obviously the name is taken from our original idea. So many of these were spin-off projects. At that time, there was growing interest in the whole idea of urban forestry. And a number of us got together to organise the first UK Urban Forestry Conference. Three sort of elements came together in this. First was our Forest of London project. The second was the work that was being done in Birmingham. And thirdly, work that was being done by Northern planners in Scotland. And these three elements essentially came together and organised the first UK Urban Forestry Conference. There were subsequently two further conferences held in 91 and 93. On the money that was generated by the first conference, the other two conferences didn't actually make any money, but the first conference had quite a surplus. Some of the money went to the Black Country Urban Forestry Unit, which then developed into the National Urban Forestry Unit. But the other monies were used to set up a magazine, which was the idea of myself and Roy Stirrett from Northern Planners. We realised that the emerging urban forestry movement in Britain needed some kind of unifying magazine for the emerging network, and we set up Urban Forest magazine, which ran very successfully for a number of years, but it always struggled to actually find sufficient funding. But it did provide the network. By the time it sort of ran out of steam, urban forestry then was no longer this sort of new idea. It started to be accepted into the mainstream of government thinking. To go back to the United States, I'd obviously had very close connections with many Americans, but I'd never actually been there until 1989. and I got the chance to speak at the fourth National Urban Forestry Conference in St. Louis, Missouri. This was an absolutely wonderful experience. Around 700 delegates, quite a few overseas delegates, and I met many of the people that were the founding fathers of urban forestry, and made many great connections. This was organized by what was then called the American Forestry Association, now called American Forests. And then I got the chance in the next conference in 1991 in Los Angeles to go again and also represent Britain and speak about the developments that we were doing. I then got the chance to work on one of probably the most significant urban forestry initiatives of the second part of the 20th century in Britain. It's called the Community Forests Initiative. I worked as a consultant on the development of a national program for this, as a consultant to the Countryside Commission and Forestry Commission. The idea was to create 12 new community forests on the fringe of major cities in England. It was originally intended to be Wales, but there's an amusing story in my book about what happened in terms of the plans for Wales. The Welsh did their own thing, and fair play to them. So yes, the whole idea of transforming some of the urban fringe of Britain's or England's cities with these community forests. Meanwhile, things were still progressing in Ireland, although I wasn't directly involved in setting this up. Obviously, the name, pays tribute to the original Forest of projects. This was the Forest of Limerick project, launched in 1991. John Fearon and Fergal Malloy had a big hand in helping to establish this. There was a great project in Corbolly Wood called the Children's Wood, and here's a photograph of some of the children planting trees being filmed by RTE television. That was a great project. And around that time, we had the first Irish Urban Forestry Conference, and this was held in June 1991. Opening address by Minister Robert Malloy, keynote address by that great man again, Fergal Malloy. One of the things that really pleased me about Fergal's keynote address was that Fergal really understood the concept of urban forestry and was clear as a bell on what it was all about. We couldn't say the same thing about some of the speakers that we had at our urban forestry conferences in Britain. There was some confusion, people not really understanding the concept, thinking it was maybe just about woodlands, which of course it wasn't. But Fergal did a brilliant keynote address, and I was very privileged to be one of the speakers at that event. So that was a landmark there. Well, then I suppose the next big development on the island of Ireland was the Forest of Belfast project. By this time, I was working as a consultant in Glasgow on developing a Glasgow project and coming across 3 days a week to develop the Forest of Belfast project. I'd always wanted to do a Forest of Belfast project, but I realized that, this was going to be quite different to anything else that I'd done before. And it was hugely challenging, but very rewarding. Don't forget that at the beginning of the 90s, the Troubles were still raging, and the city was physically divided in many places by so-called peace walls. It was a troubled place. The British Army were very visible on the streets of Belfast, and many parts of the city were effectively a war zone. This is typical of the bombing campaign that the IRA were undertaking in the city centre at the time, targeting government and commercial premises, trying to launch an economic war on the British state. And warnings were given, but unfortunately, buildings and trees could not get out the way. And this is a damage of one of their huge bombs that was exploded in Bedford Street. But against this background, I managed to network various organisations, local authorities, to develop the Forest of Belfast project. The Belfast City Council was a prime mover, but many other voluntary organisations, and we were using the techniques that I'd learned in London and elsewhere to develop commercial sponsorship for this. So although we had core funding from central government, we also raised a huge amount of commercial sponsorship. The project was launched in, I think it was June 92, with the unveiling of this huge commemorative stone at Shaw's Bridge and the planting of 12 oak trees. And I was very specific about this. The trees were planted by school children, a group of children from a special school, Fleming Fulton, and also from Northern Ireland's first integrated school. And I wanted this very specifically to send a clear message about the inclusivity of the Forest of Belfast project. We're all affected equally by the environment, and I needed to reach across the divide and bring people together in the name of trees. And we were very successful in doing that. There was also a technical side to the project. I undertook the first kind of survey of Belfast's urban forests using trainees from Enterprise Ulster. We trained them up in tree identification, got them out. First off, it was done by mapping from aerial photography. Of course, you know, in those days, it had to be done by hand, by photographs and what have you. And we mapped Belfast's urban forest, and it's quite interesting because, you know, I had this idea of tree equity, that trees were not evenly distributed throughout the whole of a city's urban forest, and this quite clearly shows, you know, the disproportionate areas. For example, West Belfast there with 6.7% tree cover, and East Belfast with nearly 17%. So you can see, you know, trees and woodlands weren't evenly distributed throughout Belfast. And out of that was a strategy was developed, but that wasn't particularly successful. But we did a number of schemes. Under the Forest of Belfast, we had tree warden scheme. We had various leaflets. We had a street tree sponsorship scheme. That was also very good. The tree warden scheme was particularly successful. And as I say in my book, I talk about that in quite a lot of detail. And then we had a very significant cross-border contact. I actually, one day, I had an office in the Cecil Ward building in Belfast City Council. I wasn't employed by Belfast City Council. I was employed by the Partnership of Organisations, but I had an office there. And I got a phone call from a guy called Kevin Collins down in Dublin, who was doing a master's degree at UCD in urban forestry, supervised by a guy called John McLaughlin, who worked for Quilcher. And Kevin asked me if he could come up to Belfast and have a look at what we were doing in the Forest of London project. And on a lovely day in February 93, Kevin and John McLaughlin paid a visit over 2 days. And this was the first significant cross-border contact on the topic of urban forestry in Ireland. And Kevin went on to do a huge amount of really valuable work in developing urban forestry in the Republic, responsible for further national urban forestry conferences. He became the urban forester at the Tree Council of Ireland. And John McLaughlin, John is now retired, but he did a huge amount of work in his time. And I was very pleased to see that I think only yesterday he was giving a talk at the Botanic Gardens as part of National Tree Week. Good to see that John is still making a good contribution. So as part of the Forest of Belfast project, we organised what was called a Teddy Bear's Picnic in the Botanic Gardens. This was environmental games on the theme of Teddy Bear's Picnic, where the kids brought little teddy bears, and we did games, and then distributed trees that they could take back to plant at their school or local community. That was lovely. I organised a creative writing and painting competition sponsored by the Irish News newspaper. This was hugely successful. Many schools across Northern Ireland participated in that, and the creative writing competition, poetry and prose. And then I organised a Forest of Belfast tree fair. This was a driving force behind this was actually the Forest Service. I had in my earlier days worked on a number of alternative fairs, like sort of Glastonbury type fairs in East Anglia, and some of these were called tree fairs. It was basically a festival celebration of anything to do with trees, woods, forestry, and timber. And as part of that, we had a huge wood sculpture as the central feature of the tree fair. And it was wonderful. It was held over 2 days. It attracted over 15,000 people. The first day was a school's day, but the second day was open to all the public. We got the famous TV radio personality Jerry Anderson to open it. That's the top left there. We had music, theatre, all sorts of things. It was a wonderful, wonderful event. Now, murals. I'd always been interested in community murals, and when I was in London, I had quite a lot to do with people who were involved in community murals. When I came to Belfast, I discovered a different sort of mural, and I thought to myself, well, maybe we could set a new mural tradition in Belfast by doing murals on the theme of the environment and a way of bringing people together. So I got funding from the Northern Ireland Arts Council and a local paint retailer, and recruited a number of local artists. And we developed a series of 6 murals, 3 in nationalist areas and 3 in unionist areas, on the theme of trees and the Forest of Belfast. This was a lovely one that was done on the Ballybeen estate in East Belfast. There's the mayor of Castlereagh and Ken Parker, who was the artist. And we also did others. This is one on the Falls Road. This was ended up by being particularly famous because it was later used in a television advert on Irish television to project a positive view of Belfast. But when I actually took this photograph, I didn't intend to get the British armoured car in there. I was quite annoyed when I first saw it, and then I realised what a poignant photograph it actually was. It was left untouched for many years, just opposite the Irish Centre, the Irish Cultural Centre, Culturaland on the Falls Road there. But eventually, when the whole block was redeveloped, the mural disappeared. We also had a tree dressing day. This was an idea that I'd picked up from an organisation based in London called Common Ground, who was decorating trees to highlight their cultural and environmental significance. We had 2 categories of competition. One for schools, which we set up. Obviously, we didn't get the kids to put up the decorations, but they designed and made the decorations, and these were put up in the Botanic Gardens in Belfast by Alan McHaffey's tree gang for Belfast City Council. Did a wonderful job for us, and it was a lovely day. We got entertainment and what have you, and they stayed up for a week, all these decorations. The one for community groups, well, that was quite interesting because at this particular moment, it was a very tense period in the Northern Ireland Troubles. We'd recently had the Shankill bomb, which, as you may know, was a botched IRA attempt to blow up the leadership of a loyalist paramilitary organisation, but the bomb went off prematurely. blowing the bomber up and several totally innocent people, and it was horrendous. But what was also horrendous was the various revenge shootings that were carried out by loyalist paramilitaries, bursting into bars late at night and just gunning people down. So this was a very tense time. But what I found absolutely fascinating was that a number of the entries, we had about 20 entries from community groups, 5 or 6 of these were entitled Peace Trees. And this is the one that I had to give the first prize to. This is actually on the Shankill Road itself and was done by a group of women living on the Shankill Road. And if you look in the background of this particular photograph, you will see a gap in the buildings. I don't know how clear that's where the bomb went off just a few weeks previously. And it was very brave of these ladies to actually decorate this tree and call it the Shankill Community Peace Tree, when many people in all over Northern Ireland were just looking for revenge and what have you. And they decorated the tree with people in different costumes around the base. It was very, very poignant, very moving. Anyway, we ran out of money in terms of the Forest of Belfast, and I actually decided at that point I would do a doctorate degree writing up the whole story of the development of urban forestry in Britain and Ireland. I did a couple of significant surveys, one in Britain and one in the Republic of Ireland, as part of my doctorate degree with the University of Ulster. I then got a wonderful phone call from Myerscough College in Lancashire, which was then the National Arboricultural Centre, and asked, they had just started degree courses. And while my good old friend Dalgar O'Callaghan, who was head of arboriculture at Myerscough at the time, couldn't offer me the job, he strongly encouraged me to apply, and fortunately I did get the job. And for the next 15 years, I was at Myerscough College, commuting backwards and forwards from Belfast every week. And it was a wonderful experience. They had just started degree courses. We then developed the first online courses in urban forestry. And then I had the great satisfaction of starting Europe's first master's degree in arboriculture and urban forestry. I had a wonderful time at Myerscough. I also undertook some important research. Terence mentioned this in the introduction. Trees in Towns 2 was a major government study on trees in England, and this was a major piece of work, and still stands up as the most detailed account of urban tree management in England so far. And it also included 10 targets for local authorities to try and achieve. So then I retired from Myerscough. We're coming to the end of the story now. And when I retired, I was able to indulge my interest in heritage trees and gardens. And as Terence mentioned, I started writing books on this topic, and got a great deal of satisfaction out of this. So there are my 3 kind of history books so far. But also, fortunately, my work had taken me all around the world, and I was able to explore heritage trees and landscapes around the world. I think you'll notice the Champs-Élysées there in Paris, and the National Mall in Washington. And then that's the Mendocino tree in Northern California that until I think 2007 was known as the tallest tree in the world. Subsequently found a few trees that are slightly taller, and then the baobabs of Zimbabwe. But I've always had great interest in heritage trees and landscapes, and greatly encouraged in that interest by becoming involved in the Northern Ireland Heritage Gardens Trust. Just to end now, just a few words about a topic called tree equity, which has been a theme of my career over nearly 50 years. We've known that, throughout cities that the more affluent parts of cities tend to have nice trees and greater tree cover, than the poorer parts of cities, which often have very few trees. And this is just a photo from a road near me in South Belfast. Very nice, lovely lime avenue. But contrast that with this image from East Belfast. Not a tree in sight, a very grey, and it's a very working class, relatively poor, deprived area. So this sort of happens not just in Britain and Ireland, but I've noticed it all around the world, and you get some real extremes. This is Stellenbosch in South Africa, just outside Cape Town. These are English oaks, actually, and it's an absolutely gorgeous town, university town, very wealthy, predominantly white, and beautiful treescape. Contrast that with Soweto in South Africa. I spent 2 fascinating days exploring Soweto with city council people and the struggles they had of trying to establish trees in that part of the city. So this our whole idea of tree equity, just to wrap it up now. I was actually very privileged to do, or fortunate to do, some of the very early research on tree equity. When I was doing the Trees in Towns 2 study in 2006, well, it was published we finished the research in 2006, 2004 to 2006. We looked at the correlation between what were called the indices of deprivation and canopy cover across various cities. Indices of deprivation measure things like income, employment, health, what have you. And we came up with the first, proper data on this, that, areas with high levels of deprivation have much lower tree cover. And, I would like to have continued that work. But I'm really pleased to say that in the United States, an organization, American Forests, have picked up on this idea themselves, I think completely independently of the work that I did. But they developed a thing called a tree equity score, which is a measure of which areas are the priority areas that need the most attention. And then this was picked up again by the Woodland Trust in Britain and developed into the Tree Equity Score UK. And this was only launched December before last. And it was actually launched here in Belfast. I'm delighted to say that in recognition of my early work on this topic, they got me to be the keynote speaker to launch the UK Tree Equity Score. And now that's getting a lot of publicity, and it is a really major step forward. It's also been included in the Belfast Tree Strategy, and this is one of the best tree strategies to be produced in recent years, and we're all very proud of it and the work that Alan McHaffey and his team at Belfast City Council have managed to do. So just to end, I just want to put this in a global context. One of the things that's undeniable really now is that, we are in a global environmental crisis, that we're losing trees and forests around the world, and, we're in a serious situation. But what I want to stress is this old idea of think globally, act locally. And if we can change, much of what happens in the world comes out of people who live in cities. And if we can change the hearts and minds of the people who live in cities, then maybe we can have an impact globally on what's happening around the world. So urban forestry has a huge role to play, not just in the towns and cities where we live, but globally. So the final slide, I just want to bring to your attention, I've written up my 50 years in the tree world and published a book called Planting Ideas in the Urban Forest. And this is available as a free ebook. I've borne the entire cost of this book project myself. I'm not making a penny out of it. If you go to my website there, markjohnstontrees.com, not a complicated address. markjohnston.trees.com. It'll give you all the details. It's a free ebook, but for those of you who, like me, want a proper book in your hands, you can get a printed copy at cost price, which is basically £27. I'm not making any money out of it, but it's a 650-page book. Most of the images that you've seen this evening come from the book. There's over 100 color images in there, and it's my thank you to 50 wonderful years in the tree world. So please, I hope you enjoy it. Download it; it's for free, or get a hard copy at cost price. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you, Mark, for a fantastic and fabulous insight into a lifetime promotion of this vital natural resource. I was particularly interested in the Forest of Belfast and about the murals. I thought it was very interesting. The whole paper was absolutely fascinating. And as you just said, anybody who wants to find out more
it's all in the book.
It's all in the book. So before
and much more besides.
And before we leave you, we decided we wouldn't have questions today. But what I want to do before we leave you, is to just remind everybody that we have a conference coming up on the 2nd to the 4th of October in Enniskillen. We have now 15 speakers lined up, so very full and exciting program. And we will have the flyers circulated in next month in April. So keep an eye out for those. And I think that this conference in particular, which is the World of Bulbs, will be very popular. And so early booking is probably very much advised. So to finish up, look, thank you very much, Mark, for absolutely a great talk.
Well, thank you, Terence.
And
thanks to Margie, thanks to Jackie.
Exactly. Thanks to Margie and thanks to Jackie for setting up the whole of this presentation. Okay. Well, good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.